On the evening of March 3, 2021, a 33-year-old marketing executive named Sarah Everard left her friend's house in Clapham, South London, to walk home to her flat in Brixton. It was a journey she had made many times before, a simple 50-minute walk through familiar streets in one of London's most affluent areas. She would never arrive home. Her disappearance and subsequent murder by a serving Metropolitan Police officer would not only destroy her family but would fundamentally shake British society's faith in its police force and spark a national reckoning about women's safety. The case of Sarah Everard represents far more than a single tragic crime. It became a watershed moment that exposed institutional failures within Britain's largest police force, revealed the inadequacy of systems designed to protect women from violence, and triggered the largest protests about women's safety in British history. The fact that Sarah's killer was a police officer, someone sworn to protect the public, made the crime particularly shocking and raised profound questions about trust, authority, and accountability. This comprehensive examination explores not only the horrific details of Sarah's murder but also the broader social, political, and institutional contexts that made such a crime possible. It analyzes the systemic failures that allowed a dangerous predator to remain in a position of authority, the investigation that brought him to justice, and the lasting impact of the case on British society. The story of Sarah Everard's murder is ultimately a story about power, how it can be abused, how institutions can fail to protect those they serve, and how tragedy can sometimes catalyze necessary change. It is a reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those who hide behind badges, uniforms, and positions of trust. Sarah Everard was born on June 11, 1987, in York, England, to parents Jeremy and Susan Everard. She grew up in a loving, middle-class family that valued education, public service, and community involvement. Her father worked as an electronics engineer, while her mother was involved in various charitable activities. Sarah was the eldest of 3 children and was known from an early age for her kindness, intelligence, and strong sense of justice. During her childhood and teenage years, Sarah excelled academically and was actively involved in her school community. She attended Fulford School in York, where she was respected by both teachers and classmates for her academic achievements and her genuine care for others. Friends from this period remember her as someone who was always willing to help others and who possessed a natural empathy that drew people to her. Sarah's university years were spent at Durham University, where she studied human geography. Durham, one of England's most prestigious universities, provided her with an excellent education and the opportunity to develop the analytical and research skills that would later serve her well in her professional career. She was an active member of the university community and formed lasting friendships with fellow students. After graduating from Durham, Sarah began her professional career in marketing and communications. She worked for several companies in London, building a reputation as a skilled and dedicated professional who was equally comfortable with data analysis and creative strategy. Her colleagues consistently described her as someone who brought both competence and compassion to her work. In her personal life, Sarah was known for her love of travel, her passion for running, and her close relationships with family and friends. She had recently started a new relationship with Josh Loaf, and friends reported that she seemed happy and optimistic about the future. She was planning to move in with Josh and was looking forward to building a life together. Sarah's commitment to social justice and equality was evident throughout her life. She was actively involved in various charitable causes and was particularly passionate about issues affecting women and marginalized communities. Her friends and family remember her as someone who genuinely cared about making the world a better place. The neighborhood where Sarah lived in Brixton was diverse and vibrant, reflecting London's multicultural character. She had chosen to live there partly because of its sense of community and its convenient location for commuting to her job in central London. The area was generally considered safe, particularly for someone with Sarah's street awareness and urban experience. Wayne Couzens, the man who would murder Sarah Everard, represented everything that is most dangerous about predators who infiltrate positions of trust and authority. Born on December 1, 1972, in Dover, Kent, Couzens had spent most of his adult life in law enforcement, using his position to mask his true nature while developing the skills and access that would enable his crimes. Couzens began his law enforcement career with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary in 2002, where he was responsible for protecting nuclear facilities. This position required security clearance and suggested that he had passed background checks designed to identify individuals who might pose security risks. However, these screening processes failed to detect the dangerous predator hiding behind his professional facade. In 2018, Couzens joined the Metropolitan Police Service, London's primary police force and one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the world. He was assigned to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, a prestigious unit responsible for protecting government buildings, foreign embassies, and high-profile individuals. This assignment placed him in positions of enormous trust and gave him access to sensitive locations and information. Couzens' colleagues and supervisors generally regarded him as a competent and reliable officer. He performed his duties adequately and showed no obvious signs of the dangerous impulses that drove his criminal behavior. This ability to maintain a professional facade while harboring violent fantasies is characteristic of many predators who infiltrate law enforcement. However, there were warning signs that should have been identified and addressed. Couzens had been reported to police on multiple occasions for incidents of sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior toward women. In 2015, he was reported for exposing himself in a fast food restaurant. In 2021, just days before murdering Sarah Everard, he was again reported for indecent exposure at a different location. These reports of sexual misconduct should have triggered serious investigations and potentially led to Couzens' dismissal from the police force. However, the incidents were not properly investigated, and Couzens faced no meaningful consequences for his behavior. This pattern of institutional failure to address warning signs represents one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Couzens' personal life also contained red flags that should have raised concerns about his suitability for police work. He had significant financial problems, a history of domestic violence allegations, and exhibited controlling behavior toward women in his personal relationships. These factors, combined with his access to firearms and police powers, created an extremely dangerous situation. The psychological profile that emerged from investigations into Couzens' background revealed a man with deep-seated misogynistic attitudes and a sense of entitlement toward women's bodies and attention. His use of his police position to facilitate his crimes represented a fundamental betrayal of public trust and professional responsibility. The evening of March 3, 2021, began like countless others for Sarah Everard. She had spent the evening at her friend Jess's house in Clapham, where they had shared dinner and caught up on their lives. The COVID-19 pandemic had limited social gatherings, making these opportunities to connect with friends particularly precious. Sarah left Jess's house at approximately 9 p.m. to begin her walk home to Brixton. The route she planned to take was familiar and generally well-lit, passing through residential areas and along main roads. She had made similar journeys many times before and was confident in her ability to navigate London streets safely. Unknown to Sarah, Wayne Couzens was also in the area that evening, not on official police business but hunting for a victim. He had driven to South London in a rental car specifically to commit violent crimes, having planned his activities in advance. His choice of location was deliberate. He knew the area well from his police work and understood the patterns of pedestrian traffic. At approximately 9:30 p.m., as Sarah was walking along the South Circular Road near Clapham Common, Couzens spotted her and decided to make her his target. Using his police warrant card and knowledge of police procedures, he approached Sarah and falsely arrested her, claiming that she had violated COVID-19 regulations by being outside during lockdown restrictions. The false arrest was a calculated strategy that exploited both Cousin's police authority and the specific circumstances of the pandemic lockdown. COVID-19 regulations had given police enhanced powers to stop and question individuals, and many people were uncertain about their rights and obligations under the constantly changing rules. CCTV footage from nearby businesses captured portions of the encounter between Cousins and Sarah. The images show him speaking to her on the street and then placing her in handcuffs before leading her to his rental car. To witnesses observing from a distance, the interaction appeared to be a legitimate police arrest, which prevented anyone from intervening. Sarah's compliance with Cousin's false arrest reflected the trust that most law-abiding citizens place in police authority. She had no reason to suspect that a police officer would pose a danger to her, and her cooperation with what appeared to be a lawful arrest was a natural response to his show of authority. The abduction took place in a busy area with multiple potential witnesses, but Cousin's use of his police identity provided perfect cover for his crimes. The public's conditioning to respect and comply with police authority worked in his favor, allowing him to commit a brazen kidnapping in plain sight without arousing suspicion. When Sarah Everard failed to return home on the evening of March 3, her boyfriend Josh Loth became increasingly concerned. Sarah was known for her reliability and good communication, making her failure to respond to messages and calls particularly alarming. Josh contacted Sarah's friends and family, hoping to find an explanation for her absence. The initial response from the Metropolitan Police to reports of Sarah's disappearance was routine and followed standard procedures for missing persons cases. However, the circumstances of her disappearance, a young professional woman failing to return home from a familiar journey, raised immediate concerns among investigating officers. The search for Sarah Everard quickly became one of the largest missing persons investigations in London's recent history. Hundreds of police officers were deployed to search parks, streets, and buildings along her planned route. The investigation also involved extensive analysis of CCTV footage from the numerous cameras that monitor London streets. The CCTV analysis proved crucial to understanding what had happened to Sarah. Investigators were able to trace her movements from Jess's house to the point where she encountered Cousins, and they identified the rental car that had been used in her abduction. This evidence provided clear proof that Sarah had been kidnapped rather than having disappeared voluntarily. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators identified Wayne Cousins as the person who had rented the car seen on CCTV. This identification immediately raised alarm bells, as Cousins was a serving police officer with access to warrant cards, handcuffs, and other police equipment that could be used to facilitate crimes. On March 9, 2021, Cousins was arrested at his home in Deal, Kent, on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. The arrest was carried out by armed officers who treated the situation as extremely high risk given Cousins' police training and potential access to weapons. His wife and children were also temporarily detained while investigators secured the scene. The search of Cousins' property and vehicles yielded crucial evidence linking him to Sarah's disappearance. Investigators found forensic evidence in his car, on his clothing, and at his home that connected him to the crime. They also discovered that he had made extensive preparations for the attack, including purchasing materials that were later used in the commission of his crimes. On March 10, 2021, human remains were discovered in woodland near Ashford, Kent, approximately 50 miles from where Sarah had been abducted. The remains were later confirmed through dental records to be those of Sarah Everard, ending the desperate hope that she might still be found alive. The investigation into Sarah Everard's murder was one of the most intensive and high-profile criminal investigations in recent British history. The involvement of a police officer as the perpetrator created unique challenges and sensitivities that required careful handling by investigators and prosecutors. The Metropolitan Police faced the difficult situation of investigating one of their own officers while maintaining public confidence in the integrity of the investigation. To address these concerns, the investigation was overseen by senior officers with no connection to Cousins or his unit, and external oversight was provided by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in building the case against Cousins. DNA evidence found on Sarah's clothing and possessions linked Cousins to the crime, while analysis of his phone and computer revealed searches related to the disposal of bodies and other incriminating activities. The digital evidence showed that Cousins had been planning violent crimes for some time before attacking Sarah. The investigation also revealed the extensive preparations that Cousins had made for his crimes. He had purchased zip ties, which were used to restrain Sarah, and had researched remote locations where he could commit violence without being detected. This evidence of premeditation would prove crucial in establishing the severity of his crimes. Investigators conducted extensive interviews with Cousins' colleagues, friends, and family members to understand his background and identify any additional victims or criminal activities. These interviews revealed a pattern of concerning behavior that had been largely ignored or inadequately addressed by his employers. The investigation expanded to examine Cousins' entire law enforcement career, looking for evidence of previous misconduct or criminal behavior. This review identified multiple incidents that should have raised concerns about his suitability for police work, including the reports of indecent exposure that had been inadequately investigated. International cooperation was required for certain aspects of the investigation, as Cousins had traveled abroad and had potential connections to criminal activities in other countries. However, the primary focus remained on his activities in the UK and the specific circumstances of Sarah's murder. The investigation also examined the institutional failures that had allowed Cousins to remain in his position despite multiple warning signs. This analysis would later inform recommendations for reforms to police vetting, training, and oversight procedures. Wayne Cousins' trial began on September 25, 2021, at the Old Bailey, London Central Criminal Court. The proceedings were closely watched by the public and media, as they represented not just the prosecution of an individual criminal but a test of the justice system's ability to hold police officers accountable for their crimes. The prosecution case, led by Tom Little QC, was methodical and comprehensive. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of Cousins' guilt, including forensic evidence, CCTV footage, and digital evidence of his premeditation and planning. The evidence clearly established that Cousins had kidnapped, raped, and murdered Sarah Everard in a series of planned and deliberate acts. One of the most disturbing aspects revealed during the trial was the extent of Cousins' premeditation. Prosecutors showed that he had spent considerable time planning his crimes, researching methods of abduction and murder, and identifying locations where he could commit violence without detection. This planning included purchasing equipment specifically for restraining and harming victims. The prosecution also presented evidence of Cousins' abuse of his police position to facilitate his crimes. His use of his warrant card, handcuffs, and police authority to effect the false arrest of Sarah represented a fundamental corruption of police power and a betrayal of public trust. Cousins initially attempted to claim that he had been forced to kidnap Sarah by an Eastern European gang that was threatening his family. However, this defense was quickly demolished by prosecutors who showed that there was no evidence of any such gang and that Cousins had acted entirely of his own volition. On March 8, 2022, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah's disappearance, Cousins pleaded guilty to kidnapping, rape, and murder. His guilty plea spared Sarah's family the trauma of a full trial but also prevented the public airing of many details about his crimes and the institutional failures that had enabled them. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for Sarah's family and friends to describe the impact of her loss on their lives. Their victim impact statements were powerful reminders of the human cost of Cousin's crimes and the lasting damage caused by his actions. On September 30, 2021, Cousins was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, meaning he would never be eligible for parole. This sentence, reserved for the most serious murders, reflected both the gravity of his crimes and the particular aggravating factors including his abuse of police authority. The investigation into how Wayne Cousins was able to commit his crimes while serving as a police officer revealed a series of institutional failures that had allowed a dangerous predator to remain in a position of trust and authority. These failures raised serious questions about police vetting procedures, supervision, and accountability mechanisms. The most significant failure was the inadequate investigation of reports about Cousins' indecent exposure. On February 28, 2021, just 3 days before he murdered Sarah Everard, Cousins was reported for exposing himself at a McDonald's restaurant in Swanley, Kent. This report was made to Kent police, but no meaningful investigation was conducted, and Cousins faced no consequences. This incident was not isolated. Cousins had been reported for similar behavior in 2015, and there were other reports of inappropriate conduct that had been inadequately addressed. The pattern of sexual misconduct should have triggered serious investigations and potentially led to his dismissal from the police force. The vetting procedures that had allowed Cousins to join the Metropolitan Police were revealed to be inadequate and superficial. Background checks had failed to identify his financial problems, his history of inappropriate behavior toward women, and other factors that should have disqualified him from police work. Supervision and oversight of Cousins during his police career were also inadequate. Despite being assigned to high-security duties protecting diplomatic and government facilities, he was not subject to regular psychological evaluations or enhanced monitoring that might have identified his dangerous tendencies. The culture within some parts of the Metropolitan Police was revealed to be problematic, with evidence of misogynistic attitudes and inappropriate behavior being tolerated or ignored. This toxic culture created an environment where predators like Cousins could operate without fear of exposure or accountability. The firearms training and access that Cousins received as a police officer provided him with additional capabilities for committing violence. While he did not use his service weapon in murdering Sarah, his police training had given him knowledge of restraint techniques, crime scene management, and other skills that he employed in his crimes. The institutional response to previous concerns about Cousins was characterized by a pattern of minimization and failure to take protective action. Reports of misconduct were not properly investigated, patterns of behavior were not recognized, and opportunities to remove him from his position were not taken. The revelation that Sarah Everard had been murdered by a police officer triggered an unprecedented public response that reflected deep-seated concerns about women's safety and police accountability. The case became a focal point for broader discussions about gender-based violence and institutional failures in protecting women. Plans for a vigil to commemorate Sarah's life and protest violence against women were organized for March 13, 2021, at Clapham Common, near where she had been abducted. The event, organized by the group Reclaim These Streets, was intended to be a peaceful gathering to honor Sarah's memory and demand action on women's safety. However, the vigil became controversial when the Metropolitan Police sought to ban it, citing COVID-19 restrictions on public gatherings. This decision was widely criticized as insensitive and hypocritical, particularly given that the police force itself was at the center of the scandal. Legal challenges to the ban were unsuccessful, creating tension between organizers and authorities. Despite the official ban, hundreds of people gathered at Clapham Common on the evening of March 13 to pay their respects to Sarah and express their anger about violence against women. The gathering was initially peaceful, with participants placing flowers and holding signs calling for justice and change. The Metropolitan Police's response to the vigil was heavy-handed and widely criticized. Officers moved in to disperse the crowd, making several arrests and using physical force against peaceful protesters, including women who were participating in the memorial. Images and videos of police officers restraining and arresting women at a vigil for a woman murdered by a police officer created a public relations disaster for the force. The scenes from the vigil sparked national outrage and led to widespread criticism of the Metropolitan Police's handling of both the vigil and the broader issues raised by Sarah's murder. The contrast between the police's aggressive response to peaceful protesters and their failure to properly investigate Cousin's previous misconduct was stark and damaging. The public response extended far beyond the vigil itself. Social media was flooded with accounts from women sharing their own experiences of harassment, assault, and fear. The hashtag Sarah Everard became a rallying point for discussions about women's safety and the systemic nature of male violence against women. The case also prompted reflection on the advice commonly given to women about staying safe, such as avoiding certain areas, not walking alone at night, or carrying personal alarms. Many pointed out that Sarah had followed all the conventional safety advice yet had still been murdered by someone whose job was supposed to be protecting her. The Sarah Everard case created significant political pressure on the British government to address issues of women's safety and police accountability. The case became a defining moment for discussions about criminal justice reform and highlighted the inadequacy of existing systems for protecting women from violence. Home Secretary Priti Patel faced intense scrutiny over the government's response to the case and was forced to defend police actions at the vigil while also acknowledging the legitimate concerns raised by Sarah's murder. The government's initial response was widely seen as inadequate and tone-deaf to public concerns. Prime Minister Boris Johnson also faced pressure to provide leadership on the issues raised by the case. His government's record on women's rights and criminal justice was criticized, and opposition parties used the case to highlight broader failures in government policy and priorities. The case prompted calls for legislative changes to address violence against women, including proposals for new crimes, enhanced sentencing, and improved support for survivors. The government eventually announced a strategy to combat violence against women and girls, though critics argued that the measures were insufficient given the scale of the problem. Parliamentary debates about the case revealed deep divisions about how to address the issues it raised. Some MPs called for fundamental reforms to policing and criminal justice, while others defended existing systems and argued for more limited changes. The case also had implications for police funding and priorities. The revelation that resources had been inadequate for properly vetting and supervising officers like Cousins led to calls for increased investment in police accountability and oversight mechanisms. International attention to the case created diplomatic pressures for the UK government. The case was widely covered in international media and was seen as a test of Britain's commitment to women's rights and rule of law. The government's response to the case became a significant factor in subsequent elections and political developments. The handling of the vigil and the broader issues raised by Sarah's murder influenced public opinion and voting patterns, particularly among women voters. The Sarah Everard case precipitated the most serious crisis of confidence in the Metropolitan Police in decades. The force faced unprecedented criticism and calls for fundamental reform following the revelation that one of their officers had committed such a horrific crime. Commissioner Cressida Dick initially resisted calls for her resignation but faced mounting pressure as additional failures and scandals emerged. The force's handling of the vigil for Sarah, combined with other incidents of misconduct, created a crisis of leadership that ultimately proved unsustainable. The institutional review that followed Sarah's murder revealed widespread problems within the Metropolitan Police that extended far beyond the specific failures related to Cousins. These problems included inadequate vetting procedures, poor supervision of officers, and a culture that tolerated or ignored misconduct. The review identified hundreds of officers who should not have been allowed to continue serving due to various forms of misconduct or unsuitability for police work. This revelation suggested that the problems that had enabled Cousin's crimes were systemic rather than isolated incidents. Public confidence in the Metropolitan Police plummeted following the case, with surveys showing that large numbers of Londoners no longer trusted the force to protect them or investigate crimes effectively. This loss of confidence had practical implications for police effectiveness, as public cooperation is essential for successful law enforcement. The force implemented numerous reforms in response to the crisis, including new vetting procedures, enhanced training on professional standards, and improved mechanisms for reporting and investigating misconduct. However, many critics argued that these changes were insufficient given the scale of the problems revealed. The case also prompted broader discussions about police culture and the recruitment, training, and supervision of law enforcement officers. Questions were raised about whether the current systems for producing police officers were adequate for the challenges of modern policing. International comparisons were drawn between the Metropolitan Police's response to the crisis and how other police forces had handled similar scandals. These comparisons generally reflected poorly on the Met's leadership and institutional culture. The Sarah Everard case occurred within a broader context of epidemic levels of violence against women in the UK and globally. The case served as a catalyst for discussions about the systemic nature of male violence against women and the institutional failures that enable such violence to continue. Statistics revealed that women in the UK face extraordinarily high levels of sexual harassment, assault, and murder, with the vast majority of perpetrators being men known to their victims. The fact that Sarah was killed by a stranger was actually unusual, as most women who are murdered are killed by current or former intimate partners. The case highlighted the particular vulnerabilities faced by women in public spaces and the inadequacy of advice that places the burden of safety on women rather than addressing the behavior of men who commit violence. The concept of stranger danger was revealed to be misleading when the stranger was a police officer. Research into male attitudes toward women revealed disturbing levels of entitlement, misogyny, and acceptance of violence that contribute to the environment in which crimes like Sarah's murder occur. The case prompted discussions about how society socializes boys and men and the need for cultural change to address the root causes of violence against women. The international context also revealed that violence against women is a global pandemic that affects women regardless of their country, social class, or other circumstances. The Sarah Everard case resonated with women worldwide who recognized similar vulnerabilities and institutional failures in their own societies. The case prompted discussions about the effectiveness of existing legal frameworks for addressing violence against women. Many advocates argued that the criminal justice system was inadequately designed to prevent such violence or to provide justice for survivors. The Sarah Everard case generated unprecedented media coverage that shaped public understanding of the issues involved and influenced the political and social responses to the crime. The coverage also raised important questions about how media handles cases involving violence against women. Traditional media coverage of the case was extensive and generally sympathetic to Sarah and her family. However, some coverage was criticized for focusing excessively on Sarah's personal characteristics and behavior rather than on the institutional failures that had enabled her murder. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying public outrage about the case and organizing responses, including the vigil and ongoing activism. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook became spaces for sharing personal experiences of harassment and assault while also organizing collective action. The hashtag Sarah Everard became one of the most widely used on British social media, with millions of people sharing their thoughts, experiences, and demands for change. This online activism helped maintain pressure on authorities and prevented the case from being forgotten as media attention moved to other stories. However, social media also became a platform for harassment and abuse directed at those speaking out about the case. Women who shared their experiences of violence or called for changes faced misogynistic attacks and threats, highlighting the toxic online environment that contributes to broader patterns of abuse. The case also prompted discussions about the role of social media in both facilitating and combating violence against women. While platforms can be used by predators to identify and target victims, they can also provide spaces for survivors to share their experiences and organize for change. The international reach of social media ensured that the Sarah Everard case became a global news story, influencing discussions about women's safety and police accountability in many countries beyond the UK. Following the conviction of Wayne Couzens and the public outcry about institutional failures, the Metropolitan Police and other law enforcement agencies began implementing reforms designed to prevent similar crimes and restore public confidence. These reforms addressed vetting, training, supervision, and accountability mechanisms. New vetting procedures were introduced that included more thorough background checks, regular revetting of existing officers, and enhanced procedures for investigating reports of misconduct. These changes were designed to identify potentially dangerous individuals before they could cause harm. Training programs were revised to include greater emphasis on professional ethics, appropriate conduct toward women, and the recognition of warning signs of predatory behavior. Officers were also required to complete additional training on domestic violence and sexual offenses. Supervision and oversight mechanisms were strengthened to ensure that concerning behavior would be identified and addressed more quickly. This included regular welfare checks, enhanced performance monitoring, and clearer procedures for reporting and investigating misconduct. The Independent Office for Police Conduct was given enhanced powers and resources to investigate serious misconduct cases and ensure that police forces were properly held accountable for their officers' actions. These changes were designed to increase public confidence in the oversight process. New policies were implemented regarding officers' conduct in their personal lives, with clearer standards about behavior that would be considered incompatible with police service. These policies addressed some of the gray areas that had previously allowed problematic behavior to continue. However, critics argued that many of the reforms were inadequate given the scale of the problems revealed by the Sarah Everard case. Calls for more fundamental changes to police culture and structure continued, with some advocating for complete transformation of how policing operates. The Sarah Everard case catalyzed a national conversation about women's safety that extended far beyond policing issues to address the broader social and cultural factors that contribute to violence against women. This conversation led to important policy changes and social initiatives designed to address the root causes of such violence. The case highlighted the inadequacy of advice that focuses on women's behavior rather than addressing men's violence. The traditional guidance to avoid certain areas, not walk alone, or carry alarms was revealed to be ineffective when the perpetrator was someone in a position of authority who could exploit his position to commit crimes. Educational initiatives were launched to address the attitudes and behaviors that contribute to violence against women. These programs targeted schools, universities, and community organizations and focused on promoting healthy relationships, consent, and respect for women's autonomy and safety. Workplace policies were reviewed and strengthened to address sexual harassment and create safer environments for women employees. Many organizations used the Sarah Everard case as a catalyst for examining their own cultures and implementing necessary changes. Public transportation and urban planning began to incorporate considerations of women's safety more systematically. This included improved lighting, better CCTV coverage, and design changes intended to make public spaces safer for all users. The case also prompted discussions about the criminal justice system's response to violence against women more broadly. Questions were raised about sentencing practices, support for survivors, and the effectiveness of existing legal frameworks in preventing and addressing such crimes. International best practices for preventing violence against women were examined, with the UK looking to other countries for examples of effective policies and programs. This international perspective helped inform domestic reform efforts. The investigation into Sarah Everard's murder demonstrated the crucial importance of digital evidence and modern forensic techniques in solving serious crimes. The case also highlighted both the opportunities and challenges created by technology in contemporary criminal investigations. CCTV footage was central to identifying Wayne Couzens as Sarah's killer and establishing the timeline of events on the night of her murder. London's extensive network of surveillance cameras provided investigators with detailed evidence of the abduction and helped establish Couzens' movements before and after the crime. Digital forensics analysis of Couzens' electronic devices revealed crucial evidence of premeditation and planning. His internet search history showed that he had researched methods of restraining and harming victims, locations for disposing of bodies, and other information relevant to committing serious crimes. Mobile phone evidence was also crucial to the investigation. Analysis of cell tower data helped establish the movements of both Sarah and Couzens on the night of the murder, while communications data provided insights into Couzens' planning and his attempts to establish alibis. The investigation also utilized advanced forensic techniques including DNA analysis, digital reconstruction of crime scenes, and other scientific methods that provided crucial evidence for prosecution. These techniques demonstrated the evolution of forensic science and its importance in modern criminal investigations. However, the case also highlighted some limitations of technology in preventing crime. Despite extensive surveillance systems, Couzens was able to commit his crimes because his police authority provided cover for his actions. This raised questions about how technology can be most effectively used to prevent rather than just investigate crimes. Social media analysis provided additional insights into both Couzens' behavior and the public response to the case. Investigators examined his online activities for evidence of criminal planning or inappropriate behavior, while social media platforms became important tools for organizing public responses to the case. The Sarah Everard case attracted significant international attention and prompted comparisons with similar cases in other countries. These international perspectives provided valuable context for understanding the broader global issues of police violence and institutional accountability. The case was widely covered in international media, particularly in countries with similar legal and policing systems. The coverage often focused on the unique aspects of the case, particularly the involvement of a police officer as perpetrator, while also drawing connections to broader issues of violence against women. Comparisons were drawn with cases in other countries where police officers had committed serious crimes against civilians. These comparisons revealed both similarities and differences in how different societies respond to such incidents and the varying effectiveness of oversight and accountability mechanisms. International human rights organizations used the case to highlight broader concerns about police accountability and women's rights in the UK. These organizations called for reforms that would bring British practices in line with international best practices for protecting human rights and preventing abuse. The case also influenced discussions about police reform in other countries, with the Sarah Everard murder being cited as an example of why stronger oversight and accountability mechanisms are necessary. International law enforcement organizations examined the lessons from the case and considered how they might inform their own practices. Academic research into the case drew international attention and contributed to scholarly understanding of police deviance, institutional failure, and the social dynamics of violence against women. This research has informed policy discussions and reform efforts in multiple countries. The international attention also created diplomatic considerations for the UK government, which sought to demonstrate that the case was being handled appropriately and that necessary reforms were being implemented. The prosecution and conviction of Wayne Couzens represented a significant test of the British criminal justice system's ability to handle cases involving police misconduct and violence against women. The legal response to the case established important precedents and revealed both strengths and weaknesses in existing legal frameworks. The decision to charge Cousins with the most serious possible offenses reflected prosecutors' recognition of the gravity of his crimes and the particular aggravating factors involved. The charges of kidnapping, rape, and murder ensured that he would face the maximum possible penalties if convicted. The legal strategy employed by prosecutors was comprehensive and methodical, focusing on establishing clear evidence of premeditation and the abuse of police authority. This approach was designed to ensure conviction while also sending broader messages about accountability for police misconduct. The sentencing decision to impose a whole-life order was significant both for its rarity and for the message it sent about society's response to such crimes. Only a small number of criminals receive whole-life orders, making Cousins' sentence a powerful statement about the gravity of his offenses and the particular evil of abusing police authority to commit murder. The legal proceedings also established important precedents about how cases involving police misconduct should be handled. The decision to have the case prosecuted by external prosecutors rather than those who regularly work with the Metropolitan Police helped ensure the integrity of the proceedings and public confidence in the outcome. The victim impact statements provided during sentencing gave Sarah's family and friends an opportunity to describe the devastating effects of her loss on their lives. These statements served not only as part of the legal process but also as powerful reminders of the human cost of Cousins' crimes. The case also raised important questions about the adequacy of existing legal frameworks for addressing institutional failures that enable serious crimes. While Cousins was appropriately punished for his individual crimes, many argued that the institutional failures that enabled his actions also deserved legal consequences. Civil litigation following the criminal case provided additional avenues for accountability. Sarah's family and others affected by the case pursued civil claims against the Metropolitan Police and other institutions, seeking both financial compensation and admissions of institutional responsibility. The case influenced broader discussions about legal reform, including proposals for new offenses specifically addressing the abuse of public office and enhanced penalties for crimes committed by those in positions of trust and authority. The Wayne Cousins case provided researchers and criminologists with valuable insights into the psychology of police officers who abuse their authority to commit serious crimes. This analysis has important implications for understanding how such individuals operate and how they can be identified and prevented from causing harm. Cousins exhibited many characteristics common to predators who infiltrate law enforcement: superficial charm and competence in professional settings, combined with deep-seated misogynistic attitudes and a sense of entitlement toward women. His ability to compartmentalize his professional and criminal behavior allowed him to maintain his police career while planning and committing serious crimes. The power and authority that came with his police position were clearly factors that enabled and motivated his crimes. The ability to carry weapons, make arrests, and command compliance from civilians provided him with tools that ordinary criminals do not possess. His abuse of these powers represented a fundamental corruption of the police role. Research into Cousins' background revealed patterns of escalating antisocial behavior that should have been identified as warning signs. His progression from indecent exposure to sexual assault to murder follows patterns observed in other cases of sexual predators, highlighting the importance of early intervention. The case also illustrated how certain aspects of police culture and training might inadvertently contribute to the development of predatory behavior. The emphasis on control, authority, and the use of force in police training could potentially appeal to individuals with pre-existing antisocial tendencies. Psychological profiling of police predators has identified common characteristics including narcissistic personality traits, poor impulse control, substance abuse problems, and histories of domestic violence. These factors can serve as red flags during the recruitment and ongoing supervision of police officers. The research has also emphasized the importance of psychological evaluation and ongoing mental health support for police officers. The stresses of police work can exacerbate existing psychological problems and contribute to the development of harmful behaviors. The Sarah Everard case can be better understood when examined alongside similar cases of police violence and misconduct in the UK and internationally. These comparisons reveal patterns and systemic issues that extend beyond individual cases and highlight the need for comprehensive reforms. The case of David Carrick, another Metropolitan Police officer who was convicted of multiple rapes and sexual offences, revealed that Couzens was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern of predatory behavior within the force. Carrick's crimes, which occurred over many years, demonstrated similar institutional failures in vetting and supervision. International cases, such as the murder of George Floyd by police officer Derek Chauvin in the United States, provide different but related examples of police violence and institutional failure. While the circumstances and contexts differ, these cases share common themes of abuse of authority and inadequate accountability mechanisms. The case of P.C. Wayne Couzens can also be compared to other instances of police officers committing serious crimes while off duty. These cases reveal how police training, access to weapons, and knowledge of investigative techniques can be exploited for criminal purposes. Historical analysis of police misconduct cases in the UK reveals that the problems exposed by the Sarah Everard case have deep roots and represent long-standing institutional failures rather than recent developments. This historical perspective emphasizes the need for fundamental rather than superficial reforms. Comparative analysis of different countries' approaches to police accountability and oversight provides insights into potential solutions to the problems revealed by the Sarah Everard case. Countries with stronger oversight mechanisms and more robust accountability systems generally experience fewer incidents of serious police misconduct. The research has also examined the effectiveness of different reform measures implemented in response to police violence cases. This analysis suggests that comprehensive reforms addressing culture, training, supervision, and accountability are more effective than piecemeal changes. The Sarah Everard case has had lasting effects on British society that extend far beyond criminal justice and policing issues. The case fundamentally changed how many people, particularly women, think about safety, trust, and institutional authority. Public surveys conducted after the case revealed significant changes in women's behavior and attitudes. Many women reported feeling less safe in public spaces, being more cautious about interactions with police officers, and having reduced confidence in law enforcement's ability to protect them. The case also influenced parenting and education, with parents and schools addressing questions from children about police, safety, and violence against women. Educational materials and programs were developed to help young people understand the issues raised by the case while maintaining appropriate levels of trust in legitimate authority. Community organizations and advocacy groups experienced increased interest and support following the case. Organizations working on women's safety, police accountability, and criminal justice reform saw growth in membership and resources as public attention focused on these issues. The case influenced cultural production including literature, film, and television that addressed themes of violence against women and police accountability. These cultural works helped maintain public attention on the issues while also providing outlets for processing the trauma and anger generated by the case. Research into the case and its aftermath has contributed to academic understanding of how traumatic events can catalyze social change. The case has become a subject of study in fields including criminology, sociology, political science, and psychology. The international influence of the case has also been significant, with similar movements and reforms being influenced by the example of the response to Sarah Everard's murder. The case has become a reference point for activists and reformers worldwide. The Sarah Everard case has prompted discussions about how technology might be used more effectively to prevent violence against women and to improve the accountability of law enforcement officers. These technological approaches represent both opportunities and challenges for improving public safety. Proposals for enhanced surveillance systems have included suggestions for better CCTV coverage, improved lighting in public spaces, and the development of emergency alert systems that could help potential victims summon help more quickly. However, these proposals also raise privacy concerns and questions about the effectiveness of surveillance in preventing determined criminals. Wearable technology and smartphone applications designed to improve personal safety have gained increased attention following the case. These technologies can help individuals stay connected with friends and family while also providing location data that could be valuable in emergency situations. Body-worn cameras for police officers have been proposed as a way to improve accountability and prevent misconduct. While not directly relevant to the Sarah Everard case, since Cousins was off-duty when he committed his crimes, such technology could help address other forms of police misconduct. GPS tracking and monitoring of police vehicles and equipment has been suggested as a way to prevent officers from using official resources for criminal purposes. These systems could help ensure that police authority and equipment are only used for legitimate law enforcement purposes. Digital platforms for reporting police misconduct and sexual harassment have been developed to provide more accessible ways for victims and witnesses to come forward. These platforms are designed to address some of the barriers that prevent people from reporting concerning behavior. However, technological solutions alone are insufficient to address the complex social and institutional problems revealed by the Sarah Everard case. Technology must be combined with cultural change, institutional reform, and sustained political commitment to be effective. The Sarah Everard case became a catalyst for international movements addressing violence against women and police accountability. The case resonated with women worldwide who recognized similar vulnerabilities and institutional failures in their own societies. International protests and vigils were organized in solidarity with the movement sparked by Sarah's murder. Cities across Europe, North America, and other regions saw demonstrations calling for action on violence against women and police reform. These international expressions of solidarity demonstrated the global nature of the issues raised by the case. The case influenced policy discussions in multiple countries, with governments and advocacy organizations examining their own systems for protecting women and holding police accountable. The specific failures revealed by the case were compared with practices in other countries to identify potential improvements. International women's rights organizations used the case to highlight broader patterns of violence against women and institutional failures in addressing such violence. The case became a powerful example of how individual tragedies can illuminate systemic problems that require coordinated responses. The case also contributed to academic research and policy development at the international level. Universities, think tanks, and policy organizations worldwide examined the case and its implications for understanding and addressing violence against women. International media coverage of the case helped maintain pressure for reforms and ensured that the issues it raised remained in public consciousness beyond the immediate aftermath of the crime and trial. The global impact of the case demonstrated how local tragedies can have international significance when they illuminate universal problems and inspire coordinated responses across borders. The Sarah Everard case had significant economic implications that extended beyond the immediate costs of investigation and prosecution to include broader impacts on policing, criminal justice, and social services. Understanding these economic dimensions is important for assessing the full impact of the case and the resources required for meaningful reform. The investigation into Sarah's murder was one of the most expensive criminal investigations in Metropolitan Police history, involving hundreds of officers and extensive use of forensic and technical resources. The costs included not only personnel and equipment but also the international cooperation required to build the case. The institutional reforms implemented in response to the case required substantial investments in new vetting procedures, training programs, oversight mechanisms, and technology systems. These costs were necessary but represented significant new expenses for already stretched police budgets. The loss of public confidence in the Metropolitan Police had economic implications for the force's effectiveness and efficiency. Reduced public cooperation with police investigations and decreased willingness to report crimes could undermine law enforcement effectiveness and require additional resources to overcome. The civil litigation arising from the case created additional financial liabilities for the Metropolitan Police and other institutions. Settlements and judgments in favor of Sarah's family and others affected by institutional failures represented substantial financial costs. The broader economic impacts of violence against women, highlighted by the Sarah Everard case, include healthcare costs for treating survivors, lost productivity due to the effects of violence and fear, and the costs of security measures that women and organizations implement to protect themselves. Investment in prevention programs and support services for survivors of violence against women increased following the case, representing positive uses of resources that could help prevent future tragedies while supporting those who have already been harmed. The murder of Sarah Everard stands as one of the most significant criminal cases in modern British history, not only because of the horrific nature of the crime itself but because of its profound impact on society, institutions, and public discourse about violence against women. The case has become a defining moment that continues to influence discussions about safety, accountability, and justice. Sarah's death was a tragedy that should never have occurred. The institutional failures that enabled Wayne Couzens to remain in his position despite multiple warning signs represent a collective failure of the systems designed to protect the public. The fact that Sarah died because these systems failed makes her murder not just a personal tragedy but a societal one. However, the response to Sarah's murder has also demonstrated the potential for positive change when public outrage is channeled into sustained advocacy and reform efforts. The courage of those who spoke out, the persistence of activists and advocates, and the political pressure generated by public awareness have all contributed to meaningful changes in how violence against women is addressed. The reforms implemented in response to the case, while imperfect and incomplete, represent important steps toward creating safer communities and more accountable institutions. The enhanced vetting procedures, improved training programs, and strengthened oversight mechanisms all have the potential to prevent future tragedies. The broader social conversation sparked by Sarah's murder has also had positive impacts. The increased awareness of violence against women, the challenging of victim-blaming attitudes, and the emphasis on addressing the root causes of such violence all represent important cultural shifts. For Sarah's family and friends, no amount of reform or social change can compensate for their devastating loss. However, the fact that Sarah's death has contributed to efforts that may prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies provides some meaning to an otherwise senseless crime. The case serves as a powerful reminder that the responsibility for preventing violence against women belongs to society as a whole, not just to women themselves. The expectation that women should modify their behavior to avoid violence places the burden on victims rather than perpetrators and fails to address the root causes of such crimes. The Sarah Everard case will be remembered as a turning point in British discussions about women's safety and police accountability. While the changes that have resulted from the case are still evolving and their ultimate effectiveness remains to be determined, the case has undeniably shifted public consciousness and political priorities in ways that may help prevent future tragedies. The legacy of Sarah Everard's life and the circumstances of her death continue to inspire those working for justice, safety, and equality. Her story has become a symbol of both the vulnerabilities faced by women in contemporary society and the potential for positive change when communities come together to demand accountability and reform. In the end, the Sarah Everard case represents both the worst and best of human nature, the capacity for evil and institutional failure alongside the potential for courage, solidarity, and meaningful change. The challenge for British society is to ensure that the lessons learned from this tragedy result in lasting improvements that honor Sarah's memory and protect future generations of women.